Constantinople in 1453 was more than just a city. It was a symbol of an empire and a coveted prize. For over 1,000 years, this metropolis straddling Europe and Asia had been the capital of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, famed for its massive defensive walls and strategic position. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople's importance was both strategic and cultural. It controlled key trade routes between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean and stood as a bastion of Christianity in the East. For the expanding Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II, capturing Constantinople would not only secure a vital choke point between continents, but also fulfill a long-sought goal of conquest. The siege that unfolded in spring 1453 would prove historic. It was the final chapter of the Byzantine Empire and a turning point in military history. In this documentary, we explore the siege chronologically, focusing strictly on the military and siegecraft aspects of this epic battle. Over the centuries, numerous armies had tried and failed to seize this city, from Arab caliphates in the early medieval period to Bulgarian, Rus, and earlier Ottoman besiegers. Apart from the notorious Fourth Crusade in 1204, which temporarily conquered the city, Constantinople had managed to repel nearly every assault. The most recent Ottoman attempt in 1422 had also been unsuccessful, reinforcing the capital's reputation as unconquerable. The city's geography and defensive architecture, Constantinople's defenses, were the product of centuries of engineering, making it one of the most fortified cities of the medieval world. The city occupied a triangular peninsula bounded by water on two sides and land on one. To the north lay the inlet of the Golden Horn, a natural harbour, and to the south the Sea of Marmara. The only land approach was from the west, where the city faced Europe. Across this landward side stretched the legendary Theodosian walls, a complex system of moats, walls, and towers that had withstood countless sieges. These massive stone and brick fortifications were exceptionally thick. The inner wall was up to 5 meters thick in places, making them extremely resilient to traditional siege engines of earlier eras. The Theodosian walls actually consisted of a double wall, an outer wall about 8 meters high and an inner wall towering roughly 12 meters high, with a broad moat in front. Between the outer and inner walls was a terrace, peribolos, which allowed defenders to fall back to a second line if the outer wall was breached. Dozens of sturdy towers punctuated these walls at regular intervals, providing elevated firing positions and enfilading coverage along the base of the walls. On the seaward sides, Constantinople was protected by somewhat lower walls along the coastline of the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara. These sea walls were formidable in their own right, though not as thick as the land walls, and they had to be guarded from attack by ships. To secure the northern sea approach, the Byzantines had a massive iron chain that could be stretched across the mouth of the Golden Horn. This chain, when raised, floated on logs and effectively barred enemy ships from entering the harbour. One end was secured to Constantinople's walls and the other to the Genoese colony of Galata across the water, forming a boom that even the strongest warships could not easily break. This ingenious defensive measure had saved the city in previous sieges by keeping naval attackers at bay. Throughout the walls, numerous gates provided access to the outside. Some were large ceremonial entrances, and others smaller postern gates. Key among them on the land side was the Gate of St. Romanus, Topkapi Gate, near the centre of the land walls, and the Cherutius Gate, also known as the Adrianople Gate, at the northern end, leading to the suburb of Blachanae. The area around the Gate of St. Romanus, in a section of wall that spanned the Lycus River Valley, was considered one of the more vulnerable spots. Here, the terrain sloped toward the wall, potentially aiding attackers, and centuries of flood erosion had slightly weakened the foundations. Still, the overall defences remained imposing. The city's layout meant any besieging army had to navigate challenging geography. A narrow land front to attack, flanked by waters that the Byzantines controlled. Constantinople's geography and architecture combined to create a defensive masterpiece that frustrated enemies for generations and contributed to its reputation as an almost impregnable fortress. The Ottoman preparations, Sultan Mehmed II, a young and ambitious ruler, only 21 years old in 1453, meticulously prepared for the siege of Constantinople. Determined to succeed where previous Ottoman sultans had failed, Mehmed spent months assembling the resources, troops, and strategies needed to crack the city's formidable defenses. The Ottoman army he gathered was one of the largest of its time. Contemporary estimates of its size vary, but modern historians suggest it numbered between 80,000 and 100,000 soldiers, possibly more if one counts support personnel and irregular auxiliaries. This force included the elite janissaries, highly disciplined infantry troops armed with bows, swords, and early firearms, as well as feudal Sipahi cavalry, irregular akinjis and azabs, light infantry, and an engineering corps of miners and sappers. The diverse Ottoman army brought together soldiers from across the Sultan's domains in Anatolia and the Balkans, unified under Mehmed's command for this crucial campaign. One of Mehmed's most significant preparations was the procurement of heavy artillery, a relatively new factor in siege warfare. The Sultan enlisted the services of a master cannon founder named Urban, originally from Hungary, who cast enormous bronze cannons for the Ottoman army. The most famous of these was a giant bombard capable of firing massive stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. According to accounts, this great cannon was so large that it required dozens of oxen and hundreds of men to transport it from the foundry to the siege lines. Supporting the supergun was an array of smaller cannons, smaller being a relative term, as these guns could still launch stone or iron projectiles of significant size against the walls. By 1453, the Ottomans had fully embraced gunpowder technology, and Mehmed intended to use it to blast through the ancient ramparts of Constantinople. The Ottomans also took steps to neutralize the city's advantages. In the months leading up to the siege, Mehmed II built a fortress called Rumeli Hisara, the fortress of Europe, on the Bosphorus north of the city. This stronghold was positioned on the European shore opposite an older Ottoman fortress on the Asian side, effectively allowing the Ottomans to control the narrow strait. This cut off Constantinople's potential supply routes from the Black Sea, deterring aid or relief fleets from the north. It was both a strategic chokehold and a forward base for the coming siege. Additionally, Mehmed assembled a sizable fleet of warships, perhaps around 100 to 125 ships of various sizes, to blockade Constantinople from the sea. These ships were meant to patrol the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara, preventing any Christian reinforcements or supplies from reaching the beleaguered city. In terms of tactics, the Ottomans prepared for a multifaceted siege. Mehmed's army included engineers who brought siege equipment like large wheeled towers, long ladders for infantry assaults, and portable bridges to cross the moat. They stockpiled huge quantities of ammunition for the cannons, as well as other provisions for a potentially lengthy investment. Camps and command tents were set up outside the land walls, and Mehmed organized his forces along the perimeter. Anatolian regiments were positioned on the south, facing the Theodosian walls near the Sea of Marmara, and his European, Rumelian regiments took their place along the northern sector by the Golden Horn, with his elite Janissary Corps kept in central reserve for critical operations. He also promised his soldiers the traditional reward for a victorious siege, 3 days of unrestricted plunder in the fallen city, giving them a powerful incentive to fight fiercely. By early April 1453, the preparations were complete. The Ottomans were ready to encircle Constantinople on all sides, land and sea, confident that with their overwhelming numbers, powerful artillery, and careful planning, they could accomplish what generations of besiegers had not: the capture of the great city. Opening phase of the siege. The siege began in early April 1453, with the Ottoman army arriving outside Constantinople and methodically surrounding it. By April 5th or 6th, Ottoman units had taken up positions along the length of the land walls. Sultan Mehmed's banner was raised in the main encampment south of the Lycus Valley, directly facing the central section of the walls. With the city enveloped on its landward side, Mehmed sent an initial demand for surrender, offering generous terms if Constantinople capitulated. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, leading the outnumbered Byzantine defenders, refused to give up the city. With negotiations exhausted, Mehmed II ordered the attack to commence. The Ottomans first focused on tightening the noose around Constantinople. Ottoman warships blockaded the Bosphorus and the entrance to the Golden Horn from the outside, while on land the army began constructing trenches and earthen ramparts facing the Theodosian walls. These earthworks gave Ottoman guns protected firing positions and provided cover for troops advancing towards the walls. Soon after they were in place, the Ottoman artillery opened fire. The thunder of the cannons echoed across the Bosphorus as stone cannonballs crashed against Constantinople's ancient walls. Mehmed's giant bombard was aimed at a section of the land walls in the Lycus Valley near the St. Romanus Gate. The impact of its enormous projectiles shook the ground and reportedly could be heard from miles away. Though the massive cannon had a very slow rate of fire, needing hours to cool and reload between shots, the psychological effect of each blast was immense. In addition to the great bombard, dozens of smaller Ottoman cannons pounded various wall segments in unison, day after day, seeking to crack the stone and create breaches. Under this relentless bombardment, parts of the outer wall began to crumble after sustained hits. By the second week of April, visible damage to towers and sections of wall was evident, especially at the points of focused fire. Once the Ottomans saw a portion of the wall weakened, they launched direct assaults to test the defences. One of the first major attacks occurred on the night of April 18th. Waves of Ottoman infantry rushed forward with ladders, trying to exploit a breach near the damaged area around the Lycus Valley. In the darkness, hundreds of attackers swarmed into the moat and up to the outer wall, while Byzantine defenders rained arrows, crossbow bolts, stones, and incendiary materials down upon them. Despite the damage to the walls, the Byzantines, led by the resourceful Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani and Constantine XI himself, managed to repel this assault. The attackers suffered heavy losses, clambering over rubble and moat obstacles under withering defensive fire. Those few who reached the lip of the breach were met with swords and spears in brutal close combat. By dawn, the Ottomans had been driven back from the walls, leaving piles of their dead in front of the defences. This initial repulse boosted the morale of the defenders and proved that the city would not fall without a determined fight. While the land battle raged, conflict also flared at sea. On April 20th, a small flotilla of Christian ships attempted a daring run through the Ottoman naval blockade. Constantine XI had been desperately awaiting any relief ships promised by Western allies. That day, 3 Genoese galleys and a Byzantine transport ship loaded with supplies approached Constantinople, sailing up the Sea of Marmara with favourable winds. The Ottoman fleet moved to intercept them before they could reach the safety of the Golden Horn. What ensued was a dramatic naval engagement within sight of the city's walls. The slower Ottoman galleys struggled to manoeuvre, while the heavier Christian sailing ships, aided by a strong wind at their backs, bore down on the blockade line. Byzantine citizens watched from the ramparts as, against the odds, the Christian vessels broke through. Ottoman ships swarmed around them, even grappling to board, but the Genoese crews fought them off, and the wind eventually carried the supply ships into the mouth of the Golden Horn, behind the protection of the Great Chain. This incident was a blow to Ottoman morale and a heartening victory for the besieged. Sultan Mehmed, furious at his navy's failure, reportedly reprimanded his admiral for the defeat. The Byzantines, meanwhile, cheered as much-needed food, ammunition, and perhaps a few extra fighting men were delivered to the city. The episode underscored that as long as the Golden Horn entrance remained closed by the chain and defended by Byzantine naval forces, the Ottomans could not completely seal off Constantinople. Byzantine countermeasures. Faced with overwhelming odds, the Byzantine defenders employed every measure possible to counter the Ottoman attacks. Central to their defense was the constant repair of the walls. Each day that Ottoman cannon fire opened cracks or holes in the masonry, teams of Byzantine soldiers and civilian volunteers laboured through the evenings and nights to patch the damage. Using bricks, stones, rubble, and wooden beams, they shored up weakened sections as best as they could before the next day's bombardment resumed. In larger breaches, the defenders constructed makeshift palisades and stockades just behind the gap, creating an inner barrier of sharpened stakes, earth, and whatever materials were available. These improvised defences meant that even if the outer wall was penetrated, attackers would still face a fight at an inner barricade with fresh defenders waiting behind it. Another crucial defensive effort was countering the Ottoman sappers and miners. As the siege wore on, Mehmed II's engineers attempted to tunnel under the walls at various points, either to collapse them or to infiltrate the city from below. The Byzantines, aware of these mining operations, organized counter-mining teams. Experienced miners from the defenders' side, including a noted engineer, Some accounts name him as Johannes Grant, possibly a German or Scotsman serving the Byzantines, directed the digging of counter-tunnels. They listened for telltale sounds of Ottoman digging underground, and, once a suspected tunnel was located, they would intercept it. They also placed barrels and bowls of water at intervals along the inner walls to observe vibrations. Ripples on the water's surface could reveal the location of digging underground. In the grim darkness beneath the earth, Byzantine and Ottoman miners clashed in claustrophobic skirmishes. Some Ottoman tunnels were flooded with water or destroyed with fire and explosives once they were discovered. These countermining efforts managed to foil several attempts to undermine the fortifications during the siege, preventing any sudden collapse of key wall sections. On the naval front, the Byzantines took measures to counter Ottoman moves in the Golden Horn. The Great Chain across the harbour remained an effective barrier, but after the Ottomans managed to transport their ships into the Golden Horn, a manoeuvre described in the next section, the defenders had to react quickly. The Byzantine and allied Italian ships inside the harbour repositioned to guard the inner harbour and support the sea walls with their own small cannons and crossbows. In late April, the Byzantines attempted a daring night attack to destroy the Ottoman ships that had appeared inside the Golden Horn. Fire ships, vessels loaded with combustibles, were prepared to drift among the Ottoman fleet and set it ablaze. Under the cover of darkness, the Byzantines launched this attack, hoping to eliminate the new naval threat behind their lines. However, the Ottomans were alert. They managed to thwart the fire ships before the fires could spread, using long poles and small boats to push the burning vessels off course and extinguish them. The effort ultimately failed, and the Byzantine raiding ships involved were themselves lost or forced to retreat. Despite this setback, it showed the defenders' willingness to take the initiative and use creative means to counter Ottoman advantages. Within the city, discipline and organization under Emperor Constantine XI and Commander Giustiniani kept the defense resilient. They redeployed their scant forces to wherever the pressure was greatest at a given moment. Archers and gunners were moved along the walls to bolster any sector under heavy attack, pouring arrows, bolts, and shot onto assaulting troops. When Ottomans attempted to fill in sections of the moat or set up ladders, the Byzantines hurled down barrels of rocks and even ancient jars of Greek fire or other incendiaries to disrupt them. Small mobile reserve units waited in the city's streets behind key gates, ready to rush to any point of breakthrough. In this way, the defenders managed to hold the Ottomans at bay far longer than the Sultan had anticipated, given the disparity in numbers. Every Ottoman move met a counter-move. Breaches were quickly barricaded, tunnels were detected and collapsed, and assaults were blunted by fierce resistance at critical moments. These measures significantly slowed the Ottoman advance, turning what Mehmed had hoped would be a quick victory into a grueling siege. Life inside the city. During the siege. Life for those inside Constantinople during the siege was tense and arduous. The population of the city by 1453 had dwindled from its former glory to perhaps 50,000 or fewer, and only a fraction of these were fighting men. With around 7,000 to 8,000 defenders, including Byzantine Greeks and foreign allies such as Genoese and Venetian volunteers, every able person had a role to play in the defense or support of the city's garrison. Civilians who were not actively fighting still contributed, ferrying stones and timber to the walls for repairs, caring for the wounded, or preparing food for the soldiers on constant watch. Under the constant thunder of Ottoman cannons, the daily rhythm of Constantinople was dominated by the needs of survival and defense. The noise of bombardment and the tremors from impacts became a grim background music to life in the city. Homes and churches near the walls suffered damage from the concussions. Some buildings collapsed or caught fire from stray shots, reminding everyone that nowhere in the city was truly safe. Nevertheless, morale among the defenders and populace, though strained, was managed through faith and communal resolve. Emperor Constantine XI himself walked the ramparts to rally the troops, sharing the dangers of bombardment alongside his men. Religious processions were held in the streets, asking for divine intervention to save the city. The emperor and the Orthodox clergy encouraged people to remain steadfast. In the evenings, as the cannons fell silent, citizens gathered in churches like Hagia Sophia to pray, even as they could sometimes hear the distant sounds of Ottoman soldiers shouting in their camps outside the walls. Supplies inside Constantinople were limited, and the longer the siege dragged on, the more concern there was about food and essentials. The arrival of the blockade-running ships in April had provided a small boost in certain supplies, but as weeks passed, the city was forced onto strict rationing. Grain, dried legumes, salted meat, and other stores were carefully apportioned. Water could be drawn from the city's many ancient cisterns and wells, though those too had to be safeguarded from any damage. Fortunately for the defenders, the siege lasted about 7 weeks. Had it gone on much longer, starvation might have become a decisive factor. Still, hunger and fatigue were constant companions by late May. The physical toll on the soldiers was severe. They had to man the walls day and night in shifts, catching sleep in brief snatches. Many had not removed their armor for days, ever ready to rush to a battlement at the alarm of an assault. Wounds accumulated, and there were shortages of medicine and bandages, making every new injury potentially fatal. Communication and information were tightly controlled by the city's leaders to maintain morale. Everyone knew the stakes of this battle. If the city fell, there would likely be no mercy from the invaders. This grim understanding steeled many to fight with desperate courage. Yet anxiety and fear were pervasive, even if unspoken. People whispered about omens and portents, such as a strange thick fog or darkness that reportedly covered the city one afternoon, or a lunar eclipse in mid-May, events that some took as divine signs regarding the city's fate. Despite these anxieties, the Byzantines maintained an attitude of grim determination. By the final days of May 1453, a somber resolve had set in among the population. They prepared for what they sensed would be the climactic battle, and they did whatever they could to support the soldiers in this last stand. Escalation of the siege. As April turned to May, Sultan Mehmed II escalated his efforts to break the stalemate and force a capitulation. Recognizing that the city's defenses were still holding firm after weeks of bombardment and assaults, he introduced new strategies to tip the balance. One of the most audacious moves came on the night of April 22nd, when the Ottomans executed a remarkable logistical feat, the transport of dozens of ships overland into the Golden Horn. Since the entrance to the Horn was sealed by the Great Chain and defended by Byzantine vessels, Mehmed devised a plan to bypass this barrier. He ordered the construction of a greased wooden road across the hilly terrain of Galata, the neutral Genoese colony north of the Golden Horn. Ottoman engineers and sailors then hauled around 70 light galleys and smaller craft out of the Bosphorus, up the slopes, and then down into the Golden Horn above the chain. Over a single night, these ships were dragged on rollers by teams of men and oxen, sliding over the greased planks. By dawn, astonished Byzantine lookouts saw an Ottoman fleet floating inside the Golden Horn, on the inland side of the chain where they had thought their harbour was secure. This bold maneuver compromised Constantinople's previously safe harbour and forced the defenders to stretch their forces even thinner. Now they had to worry about attacks on the northern sea walls along the Golden Horn, as well as the land walls. Mehmed's newly inserted Golden Horn fleet opened fire with its cannons on the city's inner harbour walls and attempted a few small-scale landings in coordination with land operations. In response, the Byzantines redeployed men and even a few cannons to the inner harbour wall, diluting their already outnumbered ranks on the land front. Not content with just moving ships, the Ottomans also set about constructing a floating bridge or causeway across a narrow part of the Golden Horn, possibly by lashing boats and planks together. This makeshift bridge allowed Ottoman soldiers and equipment to quickly cross from the Galata side of the harbour to the foot of the city walls at the Blakane district. With this, the Ottomans threatened a direct assault against the northwestern corner of the city. The very presence of Ottoman ships and troops behind what had been the Byzantines' secure flank put Constantinople in a truly perilous position, effectively surrounding the city on all sides and eliminating any safe harbour. Mehmed II also intensified the use of his engineering corps on land during May. Ottoman sappers pressed new mining attempts despite the failures of earlier tunnels. They targeted different points along the walls, hoping to achieve a surprise collapse or create a panic inside the city. Night after night, the diggers worked as close to the walls as possible, trying to tunnel under the foundations and plant large explosive charges. These efforts met with mixed success. Some tunnels were discovered and destroyed by the defenders' countermines and patrols, but each attempt forced the Byzantines to divert men to watchfulness beneath the earth, adding to their strain. Above ground, Mehmed's artillery kept up an incessant bombardment. The walls by this time showed significant wear, Some towers had been reduced to rubble, and sections of the outer wall had entirely collapsed in spots, leaving only the inner wall and makeshift barricades to hold the line. The Ottomans tried to fill parts of the moat with earth, wood, and debris from the ruined walls to create solid ramps of approach. Under cover of darkness, or in the lulls between cannon barrages, labourers heaped materials into the ditch, gradually creating pathways where attackers could charge across more easily. During this escalation phase, daily and nightly attacks became the norm. The Ottomans continuously probed the defences to wear down the enemy. Sometimes these were smaller-scale raids by select units, meant to keep pressure on the Byzantines and exhaust the defenders' endurance. At other times, larger coordinated assaults were launched on multiple fronts to stretch the defence thin. In mid-May, one notable attack came when the Ottomans rolled out a huge siege tower near the walls, a tall wooden structure reinforced with iron plates and covered in wet hides to resist fire. This tower bristled with Ottoman archers and musketeers who could fire down at the Byzantine ramparts, and it sheltered soldiers wielding a battering ram at its base. In a fierce engagement, Byzantine troops managed to neutralize this threat. During a night sortie, they set the siege tower ablaze. Accounts describe how Greek fire or an explosive charge was used to ignite it. The tower burned and collapsed, killing many of the soldiers inside and eliminating that particular danger. Though successful, such desperate counterattacks further depleted the defenders' scarce resources. By mid to late May, the stage was set for a final decisive confrontation. The incremental Ottoman gains, partial breaches in the walls, a foothold in the Golden Horn, and the relentless attrition of the defenders put Mehmed II in a position to press for the endgame. He had effectively encircled Constantinople, weakened its outer defences, and worn down its garrison. Mehmed, eager to avoid the onset of summer heat and aware that a protracted siege might invite intervention from Western powers, decided it was time to deliver one concentrated blow to take the city. He held a war council with his generals and finalized plans for a massive, coordinated final assault. The night of May 28th was chosen for preparations, and an all-out attack would commence in the early hours of May 29th. The escalation of bombardment and ceaseless assaults had been the prelude. Now the Sultan was about to unleash his full might in one last bid to overwhelm Constantinople's defenders. The final assault. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 29th, 1453, around 1:30 a.m., the Ottomans launched their final all-out assault on Constantinople. Sultan Mehmed II had signalled for a night attack, hoping to catch the weary defenders at their lowest ebb of strength. In the hours before dawn, the city's inhabitants could hear the pounding of war drums, the blare of trumpets, and the booming of cannons as the Ottoman forces moved into their attack positions. Fires and torches flickered across the Ottoman lines, and the chant of prayers and war cries filled the air, creating an atmosphere of dreadful anticipation on both sides of the walls. The assault was carefully orchestrated in successive waves. First came the Bashi Bazouks, irregular troops and volunteers, many of them poorly trained but fanatically brave, used as a vanguard to overwhelm and wear down the defenders. Thousands of these irregulars surged forward along the land walls, shouting battle cries and pressing the attack with ladders, grappling hooks, and siege pikes. They targeted several sections simultaneously: the damaged Lycus Valley area near the St. Romanus Gate, the Blakeney sector in the northwest, and other points, in order to force the Byzantines to defend everywhere at once. The Byzantine defenders on the walls braced themselves and met this first onslaught with everything they had. Arrows and crossbow bolts blanketed the approaches, the few remaining cannons and arquebuses fired into the masses of troops, and a hail of rocks and incendiary grenades, primitive explosive or firepots, rained down. Fierce fighting erupted wherever the Ottomans attempted to scale the walls or force through a breach. Many of the Bashi Bazouks fell in the moat or at the base of the walls, under the withering defensive fire before they could even raise their ladders. Those who did get ladders up were often pushed back or toppled, falling to their deaths. The assault was ferocious but uncoordinated, and after a lengthy struggle, this first wave began to falter. Corpses littered the moat and the approaches to the walls, and the remaining attackers, having expended their initial fury, retreated in disarray. The first wave had inflicted great stress on the defenders, but had failed to break through. Next, Mehmed unleashed his more organized regular troops, likely the Anatolian contingents under the command of Zaganos Pasha, one of his top generals. These soldiers were better armed and disciplined than the irregulars. They renewed the attack with greater focus, concentrating on the sections where the Byzantine defences had been most compromised by the weeks of bombardment. In particular, they pressed hard at the central section in the Lycus Valley, where the outer wall was rubble and the inner wall had been damaged. There, the Byzantines had erected a makeshift internal barricade behind the breach. The Anatolian troops stormed this area, trying to demolish the barrier and engage the defenders behind it. Meanwhile, another part of this second wave assaulted the Blachanae walls near the Kirkoporta, a small postern gate in the northern corner. According to later accounts, this gate had been bricked up but was damaged during the fighting. Some even suggest it might have been inadvertently left open in the chaos. Whatever the case, the fighting at the Blachanae sector was intense. At these points, hand-to-hand combat raged on the walls and amid the debris. The defenders, though exhausted and far fewer in number now, fought with tenacity, knowing this was the climax of the siege. For a time, it appeared they might hold yet again. The Anatolian forces were repelled in several assaults, unable to force a definitive breakthrough. The din of battle was overwhelming. Shouts, explosions, the crash of weapons, as both sides struggled at close quarters. Byzantine soldiers, alongside their Venetian and Genoese allies, clung to the remnants of their defences, pushing back scaling ladders and dousing invaders with boiling oil and pitch when possible. The stone walls, so battered and breached, became the backdrop for a brutal melee illuminated only by torchlight and the occasional flash of gunpowder. It was during this critical phase of the battle that a fateful event occurred. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese captain, who had been instrumental in organising the city's defence, was grievously wounded. Accounts differ on the exact cause. Some say he was hit by a cannon fragment or a musket shot to the chest, others that a crossbow bolt found its mark. But all agree that Giustiniani was hurt badly while defending the inner wall barricade. Bleeding and suddenly fearful for his life, he decided to withdraw from the front line to seek medical treatment, perhaps at his ship anchored in the harbour. As Giustiniani called for his men to help him away, the defence at that crucial sector began to waver. His contingent of Genoese soldiers, seeing their commander leaving and believing the wall to be lost, started to fall back in disorder. Emperor Constantine XI, who was nearby, implored Giustiniani to remain at his post and begged the Genoese to hold the line. But the damage was done. Giustiniani exited through a gate into the city's interior. He would later succumb to his wounds, and the Genoese defence of the breach collapsed. Other Greek defenders, misunderstanding the situation, thought a general retreat was underway. A sense of panic and inevitability began to spread among the exhausted men on the walls. Seizing the opportunity, Sultan Mehmed II then committed his elite troops, the Janissaries, as the third and decisive wave. The Janissaries, clad in distinctive uniforms and trained to absolute discipline, advanced with grim determination. Led by their commanders and encouraged by the sight of the faltering enemy, they aimed directly for the weakened spots, the main breach near the St. Romanus Gate, and the adjacent sections of the inner wall. Among the Janissaries were expert archers and gunmen who laid down covering fire as their comrades rushed forward. In the confusion caused by Giustiniani's withdrawal, the Janissaries managed to gain the top of the rubble ramp and inner wall at the Lycus sector. They established a foothold on the wall, finally overwhelming the beleaguered defenders at that segment. There is a famous, perhaps apocryphal story of a giant Janissary named Hassan from Ulubat, who climbed the ruined wall and planted the Ottoman flag atop it before being killed. Whether or not this specific tale is true, it symbolizes the reality that Ottoman banners soon appeared above the ramparts, signaling to all that the defense was being overcome. Simultaneously, other Ottoman forces exploited the situation at the northern end of the walls. A group of soldiers, whether through the half-ruined Kirkoporta Gate or by scaling the walls in that sector, managed to pour into the city behind the defenders. They attacked from the rear, throwing the defense of the Blachanae quarter into chaos. With enemy warriors now both in front and behind them on the ramparts, the Byzantine defense rapidly disintegrated. Some defenders threw down their arms and fled toward the city's center or the harbor. Others kept fighting in isolated pockets, only to be encircled and cut down. Emperor Constantine XI, true to his word not to outlive the city, is said to have cast off his imperial regalia and plunged into the final melee as a common soldier. along with a small band of palace guards and friends, he made a last stand near the gate area, fighting until he was presumably killed by the advancing Janissaries. His exact fate was never definitively recorded, but by sunrise, the emperor's body was reportedly identified among the dead. Once the defense on the walls crumbled, Ottoman forces flooded into Constantinople. By sunrise on May 29, 1453, organized resistance had essentially ceased. Ottoman troops surged through the streets, making for key points like the Forum, the Imperial Palace, and the Great Church of Hagia Sophia. The city's flag, the twin-headed eagle of Byzantium, was torn down, and the Sultan's flags raised in its place on the walls and towers. Some small groups of defenders barricaded themselves in towers or houses and continued to fight, but they were swiftly overcome. The victorious Mehmed II, observing from a commanding position outside the walls, sent orders to prevent needless destruction of certain buildings. But for the most part, he allowed his troops the customary reward for a successful assault. For several hours, chaos reigned as soldiers looted homes and churches, seizing treasures and rounding up captives. Doors were kicked in, and terrified civilians who had huddled in cellars or holy sanctuaries were dragged out. Many had sought refuge in Hagia Sophia during the final assault, only to find no miracle would save them. After a millennium of defiance, Constantinople, the queen of cities, had fallen to the besiegers. The final assault had lasted only a few hours, but it had decided the fate of an empire and sent shockwaves throughout Christendom and the Islamic world alike. Aftermath and military consequences. With the fall of Constantinople, the military and historical landscape of the region changed decisively. In the immediate aftermath, Sultan Mehmed II rode triumphantly into the conquered city later that day. He ordered an end to the indiscriminate looting earlier than planned to preserve the city's remaining riches and infrastructure. Mehmed famously went to the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, which had been the center of Eastern Christian worship for nearly 1,000 years, and ordered it converted into a mosque as a symbol of the new era. Ottoman casualties had been heavy during the siege. By some estimates, many thousands perished in the final assault alone, but the Sultan's victory was comprehensive. The remaining Byzantine fortresses in the surrounding area, cut off and shocked by the loss of the capital, surrendered shortly thereafter. The Byzantine Empire, already a shadow of its former self, was extinguished entirely. Mehmed II soon made Constantinople, henceforth Istanbul, the capital of his growing empire. The siege's outcome had significant consequences for military strategy and fortress design in the future. The success of Mehmed's large cannons in breaching Constantinople's formidable walls demonstrated to the world that gunpowder artillery was now a decisive factor in siege warfare. For centuries, the Theodosian walls had been a gold standard of fortification. Their failure under sustained bombardment showed that even the greatest medieval walls could be brought down with enough firepower. In response, within a few decades, military architects across Europe began to adapt their designs, creating new fortifications with lower, thicker walls angled to better absorb cannon shot. These innovations, which would evolve into the star-shaped bastion forts of the 16th century, were a direct answer to the lessons of 1453. The age of the high, straight medieval city wall was waning. The age of the artillery fortress had begun, spurred in part by the fall of Constantinople. Another military takeaway was the validation of combined arms siege techniques. Mehmed II's campaign showcased the effective coordination of infantry assaults, naval operations, heavy artillery, and engineering, mining and fortification efforts in a single siege. His use of a fleet to blockade the city and even physically maneuver ships into the Golden Horn, combined with relentless bombardment and tunneling on land, set an example of how comprehensive siege warfare could overcome even the strongest defenses. Future sieges in Europe and the Middle East would often employ similar tactics, surrounding a target by land and sea, bombarding its walls, and cutting off all relief until the position fell. Additionally, the psychological impact of Constantinople's fall reverberated far and wide. Reports of the colossal Ottoman cannons and the disciplined Janissaries spread through Europe, prompting other rulers to invest in better artillery and standing armies. The shock of losing such a renowned Christian metropolis contributed to a flurry of diplomatic and military activity in the West, though no immediate crusade materialized to reverse the conquest. For the people of Constantinople and the Byzantine defenders, the aftermath was catastrophic. Thousands of civilians and nearly all the remaining defending soldiers perished during the assault or in the immediate aftermath. Many others, men, women, and children, were taken captive and sold into slavery or ransomed. A few ships managed to escape the harbour carrying refugees, including possibly members of the emperor's family and the wounded Justiniani, bringing word of the city's fall to the outside world. The human toll was immense, and the city that had been a beacon of Eastern Christianity was left depopulated and in ruins. Yet, from a strictly military perspective, the Siege of 1453 stands out not for the scale of its brutality, which sadly was typical of the era, but for its demonstration of evolving warfare. The careful use of gunpowder artillery, the innovative tactics like hauling ships overland, and the sheer logistical organization required to sustain a 7-week combined arms siege signaled a new level of military sophistication. Conclusion. The 1453 Siege of Constantinople marked the end of an era in more ways than one. It conclusively ended the long history of the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire, and established the Ottoman Turks as the masters of a new imperial capital. In terms of military history, this siege is often regarded as a turning point that ushered in the modern age of warfare. The fall of Constantinople proved that even the mightiest medieval fortifications could not withstand the firepower of gunpowder artillery indefinitely. Siegecraft would never be the same after 1453. Rulers and generals around the world took note and began to rethink how to defend and assault fortified cities. In the decades and centuries that followed, the lessons of Constantinople influenced everything from fortress architecture to siege tactics, effectively closing the chapter on medieval fortress warfare. While the siege was deeply significant politically and culturally, this narrative has focused on its military and siegecraft aspects. From the grand strategic preparations of Mehmed II to the courageous and resourceful defense by Constantine XI's outnumbered forces, the story of the siege offers a vivid case study in the evolution of siege warfare. It was a contest of engineering and willpower, featuring massive cannons, indomitable walls, underground warfare, naval ingenuity, and finally a brutal assault that decided the outcome. By the end of May 29, 1453, the ancient ramparts of Constantinople had fallen, and with them fell a curtain on the medieval way of war. The Siege of Constantinople thus stands as a defining moment in military history, demonstrating both the culmination of medieval siege techniques and the dawn of a new age dominated by gunpowder and cannon.